Hello, Alec, over there in the legislature in Victoria. It's always busy for you, so thanks for taking the time. We had a couple of interesting directives, and maybe you can take the viewers inside to what's going on there at the legislature. But last week, I guess most recently, Premier Eby issued a directive to all ministries and agencies to review spending on goods and services being purchased from U.S. companies and try to redirect as much of that as they can to BC or Canadian companies. Do you have any sense of how many dollars we're talking about here?
It looks like we're talking about roughly $600 million in procurement costs, but it could be a lot less. It could be a lot more. It's based on different maths of how you conduct it. But it's all up in the air as to what this is actually looking like, because we have very few details. We have very few details about what is actually going to be cut, how far the provincial government can go. I know in terms, the premier's talked about in terms of some cloud-based computing services that we do procure from the U.S. From companies like Microsoft. It's going to be very, very hard to get away from those. In terms of Amazon services, that's also going to be hard to get away from. I know that up in the northern province, we have a $5 million contract with Starlink to provide internet to rural communities. That was recently raised from just over 1 million. And so there are certain areas where we're not going to be able to get away from American providers for services for the provincial government. In areas like food, for banquets, conferences, that's going to be easier. We can shift our supply to more local-based food producers. And so there are things that we can do, but it remains up in the air. It sounds like a nice, buzz announcement at this point in time of, oh, elbows up, we're going to reduce our reliance on U.S. procurement. But at the same time, how far is that actually going to go? We don't know yet. We've had the premier announce this twice now, in terms of he said that he was going to do this back in March. Now it's April. Now we have the directive to the public service to look at ways to reduce this. But I think the proof has still yet to turn up in terms of how far we can go with this.
That same public service has been tasked with finding efficiencies, which really what that means is finding ways to save money, cut costs. We see it at the health authority level with the appointment of Dr. Penny Ballem. But how big and small of a review or assessment is being done? Do you get a sense of what's going on?
Again, we don't know, because we haven't seen the terms of reference in terms of what Penny Ballem has actually been directed to look at in terms of cuts, to look at in terms of efficiencies. Health Minister Josie Osborne says that Dr. Ballem will be presenting an update to her within 6 weeks. But the health minister has also said that there are no plans at this time to make that update public. And it's going to be in the form of possibly a verbal report as opposed to a written report. It's not even going to be necessarily written down anywhere. And so we have no idea. We have no idea if this is just meeting a campaign promise and saying, this is something that we promised to do, we're going to look at ways to do it, or if this is actually a larger scale reordering of the Provincial Health Services Authority. We don't know at this point. I don't think we're going to know for a while, because we won't be able to see the result of that update in 6 weeks unless the government suddenly decides to release something on it. But it's going to be very, very hard for us to get an inside look at that if we don't actually know what the terms of reference and how broad or narrow that review is.
So aside from the health sector, which of course is the biggest piece of the provincial budget, are there any other areas where you think they'll be looking more closely?
I imagine they'll be looking everywhere. We've got a whole bunch of new ministries. We've got a new Ministry of Transportation, where it looks like there was some talk at one point about the hiring freeze, the partial hiring freeze that they've put over the public service affecting that new ministry. Now it appears that that might not be the case, but that hiring freeze could be an area, although they say they're not going to cut frontline workers in areas like health or education. But that's another area where they could look at efficiencies. In terms of the overall review of ministries, health is by far the biggest one, but then you've got areas of, you do have education where you've got plenty of money being spent, although you've got regions like Surrey, which say they're consistently underfunded. And so do you really want to cut education funding? Do you really want to cut other public services? Like where are you going to be looking at cutting funding? Because it's kind of hard to look at this budget. So much of the spending seems to have become entrenched that it's hard to find savings that don't actually massively impact people in terms of services that they've come to rely on. I'm sure there's areas, I'm sure there's staffing, I'm sure there's bloat. I mean, when you have an $11 billion deficit, there's got to be a fair amount of bloat in terms of where you're spending money, but it's finding out where that is, and maybe as opposed to Elon Musk down in the States taking a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer to provincial spending. So, well, I guess we'll see how that shakes out.
Right. And they do need to make up a bit of a hole now, right, with the cancellation of the elimination of the carbon tax.
Yes, they do. That's $1.8 billion of revenue that they no longer can account for. So what's going to be cut there? We've heard possibly EV rebates might be on the chopping block. They say that they're not going to cut heat pumps. In fact, they just pumped a whole bunch more money into heat pumps, $50 million each year over the next few years. And so it's hard to see where that money, on top of, their comments about wanting to get back towards balance, nobody expects that that's going to be a 1 or even 2 year process. An $11 billion deficit is not something that you just get rid of overnight. But getting back towards that path, now you have that loss of revenue as well, the $1.8 billion. The carbon tax had $2.8 billion worth of revenue supposed to come in this year, but $1 billion of that would go back through the climate action tax credit, which has already been cut. So you're dealing with an $11 billion deficit. You've got a $1.8 billion revenue hole on top of that. You've launched this efficiency review where we don't know the terms of reference for areas like the PHSA. We know even less about the broader review itself. It's hard to see how we're going to go about this process, how the government is going to go about this process and actually make some savings. And I imagine we won't know anything for at least the next few months about how it's actually going and whether we can actually see some real changes with this.
Do you know if they have set targets for each ministry or department?
I don't know if they have set targets for each ministry and department. I remember there being a overall target in the budget. I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Right.
But that there's an overall target, but I'm not sure how it's going to be distributed based on the different ministries.
Right. It's not something they've talked about. They've not released that information at this point, at least. No,
and I can't imagine they will.
Right. All right. Well, interesting times ahead. You've got how much longer is the House sitting?
The House is sitting until the end of May. So we're off next week for Easter. We are off next week. And then we have 3-4 weeks left to go. So we'll see how things shake out. I imagine there's only been 9 pieces of legislation. If you're going to introduce legislation, you have to do it by the end of April in order for it to actually have time to get passed. Not that that stopped the government before from introducing legislation at the last minute, but we're kind of getting down into the home stretch here.
Well, and next time we talk, we'll have a new prime minister or the same new prime minister or someone completely different. And we can talk about the relationship between our province and whoever is in Ottawa. So look forward to that, Alec.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this federal campaign being over. That's for sure.
I think a lot of people are. Thank you.
Thank you.